So here we go. A couple things. So as we start, let's see, what is this? That's probably not what I want. So we began with this. This is the article I saw that kind of made me go, wait a minute now. Something's up, right? Something's up here. So this is from cracked.com. The link's going to be in the description down below. I encourage you guys to do all of the reading on this stuff if you're interested. There's some really good information in the regular write-up as well. But this one, here we go. Headline is this. It says, 5 things that gain superpowers when we take them to space. And I was like, all right, that seems kind of cool, right? And it's talking about, earthworms and some other stuff. It's talking about concrete and, bacteria, some other things. I'll just read a little bit of this. Say, number 5, worms. We've been shooting creepy crawlies into space for longer than we humans have been managing to reach space ourselves. The very first animals in space weren't Laika the dog, Laika, or that cat that the French sent up. Wow, you monsters, the French sending up cats to space. In any case, it was a group of fruit flies that were sent up in a rocket in 1947. There's that date again, 1947. Weird. The rocket came back and the flies survived the trip. We still ship simple invertebrates up in the rockets today just to see what will happen. Monsters, I tell you, people, geez. But here's the wild part. In 2015, scientists took a bunch of worms up to the space station. After first taking the precautionary step of cutting off their heads. The worms' heads, not the scientists' heads. Everybody relax, and this is straight from the article, of course. I'm just, dramatizing a little bit. These flatworms have the ability to regenerate. And if they could function in space, they might grow those lost heads back. All right, so they chopped the heads off of these worms, took them to space. We were also open to the possibility that they wouldn't regenerate anything because some stuff stops working in zero gravity. All right, but what actually happened? This gets creepy. Check this out. When the worms came back down and the scientists examined them, they regenerated all right. In fact, some of these isolated torsos had grown 2 heads, one on each end, something that's never supposed to happen. Terrified, the scientist did the only reasonable thing and cut both the new heads off because, why not? Off with their heads, am I right? Unfortunately, this did no good at all, as both the new heads now grew back. Space had changed the worms permanently, it seems, and the only consolation is that each worm did not grow 4 heads, ruling out the otherwise very real possibility that in space, all matter will eventually be converted to the doubling heads of flatworms. Now, that's the creepy part, right? That's where we start here. And of course, it got me thinking in terms of this other stuff, because of course, if we're talking about these entities like the worms and whatnot, which is again a really creepy sort of idea as we begin here, that space sort of permanently altered these entities, and they're just worms. But did make me wonder if space is also capable of altering people to that regard, okay? And I don't necessarily mean, we're going to go out there and, chop off our elbows and grow 4 elbows or something like this. Not like that. Not like the earthworms, because we're people. We're not worms. Nobody likes me. Everybody hates me. Think I'll eat some worms, right? Not that. We're not that kind of worms, all right? Anyway, what was that from? I don't even know what that's from, but my mom used to say that all the time. Shout out Mama Strange if you're out there. Anyway, so here's another one, bacteria. So your mouth is filled with bacteria. Even aside from the germs that poop out acid and dissolve your teeth, you've got stuff like Lactobacillus plantarum, which is thankfully benign. It doesn't make you sick. It doesn't even taste bad. And presumably the ancestors who had this character, okay, anyway, but this Lactobacillus plantarum is harmless. But up in the space station, and this is something that's in our mouths, right? But up in the space station, it changes. It still doesn't taste bad, but it thrives and it spreads. It transfers to the metal surfaces of the module where it promptly adopts the task of eating its way through the titanium and steel, even faster than worse bacteria eat through the teeth, which is again the ones that give us plaque and all the rest of the stuff that destroys our teeth if we don't take care of our teeth. But anyway, we wind up with super space germs, which will eat the whole space station unless we figure out how to protect ourselves against this. And it says in the article here, one method may involve treating the titanium to make it more resistant to biocorrosion, perhaps by making an alloy with copper, something like this. Anyway, so you get the idea. There's a few things. There's a cement in here. There's glass, and how these things actually react in space. And then, of course, drugs, which is, if you synthesize actual pharmaceuticals in space, it's going to be sort of a different deal. Okay. Anyway, so this is where we start, right? This idea of when you take things to space, they react differently. They even life performs and reacts differently, okay? And as a sort of centered with the idea of that earthworm growing two heads, which is just horrifying. But it got me thinking in terms of spinning off of last night's show and that out-of-body experience. I wonder if the out-of-body experience also experiences something like this in space when it's out there. And I'm calling this tonight, of course, the OBE Avatar and Ghosts of the Deep Void. Now, here's the deal, right? Back to this where we begin. It is the same idea, okay? Except we were talking about that out-of-body experience last night and how that manifested in some of us and some of the experiencer stories and our origin stories we talked about last night. But it did get me thinking in terms of this sort of space aspect of, let's even, dare we say, the soul. On Earth, we are very insulated, clearly, by the atmosphere, by from electromagnetic radiation or radiation itself, by our electromagnetic field is what I meant to say there. But and there's a lot of actual really nasty things coming from space that we're shielded by, again, because of our atmosphere and that electromagnetic field. But it got me thinking, what if the soul has sort of a corrosion effect when you put it in space? And again, of course, we'd have to be able to, boop, pop a soul out of a human body and then, kind of float it in space and do some science and take some notes, and you know what I mean? And so the next best thing would be, of course, that out-of-body experience and the out-of-body style avatar, which goes back to Robert Monroe of the Monroe Institute. Again, he's passed away for quite some time now, but he did do a ton of work on this out-of-body experience stuff, including the locales we've talked about in the past, locale 1, 2, and 3. And even traversing, let's say, space itself in some capacity, because I guess that would become the next step, right? So if you pop out of your body and you, again, maybe start moving around the house or stuff, and you're just kind of seeing our world where it's at, surely you can sort of move outside of the atmosphere. So it got me thinking about these earthworms, and it got me thinking about the concrete and the glass and all the rest of this stuff. And if maybe, just maybe, there's a situation happening where when you put this actual OBE avatar, or Robert Monroe actually called it the second body. That was the term he used, if you want to look it up and do some more digging into this, because like I said, these rabbit holes seem to go incredibly deep when we talk about this stuff, and we end up in some wild places sometimes. Well, most of the time, let's say. But you get the idea, right? So let's say that humans. Oh, okay. So speaking of which, let's back up one little bit here, because this also fits into this. This is from Science Alert, and this is from back in 2019. Okay. And this is exactly what we're talking about, except in a different way. Headline is this: seeing Earth from space changes astronauts' minds forever. And here's why. Let's read just a little bit of this. So when astronauts first saw Earth from afar in the Apollo 8 mission in 1968, the U.S.'s second manned mission to the moon, they described a cognitive shift in awareness after seeing our planet hanging in the void. This state of mental clarity, called the overview effect, occurs when you are flung so far away from Earth that you become totally overwhelmed and awed by the fragility and unity of life on our blue globe. It's the uncanny sense of understanding the big picture and of feeling connected, yet bigger than the intricate processes bubbling on Earth. In its video here, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, so that's kind of the point. So here's, no human eyes had ever seen, when the first astronaut in space, again, I know some people don't believe space is real, all the rest, we have to take some things on faith sometimes and consider that, with all this stuff is real. I know the moon landing conspiracies and all the stuff. Anyway, just take, as usual, let's put one foot in the real world and then consider some of this stuff on faith, okay? But anyway, so the first individuals back in 1968 that were seeing the Earth from space were like, whoa, bro. And it disoriented them and even stuck with them for a very long time, and maybe even changed them forever. And it is, as they say, this overview effect. Now, of course, when you kind of stick these ideas together, the earthworms, and they're cutting off their heads and growing, new heads on both sides, which is incredibly strange and sort of changing things, not just, let's say, the physiology of living forms, these life forms, the worms, whatever they were, flatworms. But then also we're talking about some other stuff here. Back to this original article, which is from crack.com, which is from today, by the way. I think it's where I saw this. Was it today? I think it's dated, February 28th, which tomorrow's leap year. Yeah, we get 29 days in February. So anyway, so they got worms, they got the bacteria we talked about, cement. Now here's another one. So just to kind of cement the idea here, see what I did there. In 2019, astronauts in the International Space Station decided to mix up some cement. That sounds strange. Mixing cement is something you do in a bucket at home if you're handy. We expect NASA scientists to spend their experimental hours on far more nerdy pursuits. Right from the article here. Why, if astronauts are capable of mixing cement, and then the next time do they need to blow up an asteroid, NASA will probably just have one of the astronauts do it themselves instead of sending up a hand. Okay, whatever. The jokes. It's got jokes. Anyway, but cement, back to the nuts and bolts of this, cement is in fact a material absolutely bubbling with science. And we have generations of scientists to thank for why it's so strong and why buildings don't fall down. So these astronauts mixed up cement or silicate paste to see if the stuff can properly mix in space, since we might have to regularly whip up batches up there sooner or later, which, again, is how you're going to build the civilizations on the moon and Mars and everything else, right? If you believe that's a real thing. Take a look at these images down below. You can see links in the article down there. But since we lack a NASA-level understanding of cement, let's get an explanation from a difference of the astronauts. Anyway, the point is this. When cement is setting, gravity pulls the heavier parts down and air bubbles travel up and escape. And I saw a thing they did recently. I saw this on Twitter X where they kind of shake all that stuff out of it. So they create the concrete and it has all these bubbles in it. And you can see it sort of in this clear cylinder that they put this concrete in, okay? And it's going to dry, but you see all of the sort of imperfections in this process we're talking about with gravity. But then they put like this little, what is it, like a wand. And it kind of sends like this vibration into it and then kind of cleans out all of the imperfections in the concrete itself. But that's here on Earth. So you got to wonder that, and of course it makes it stronger because you're really pulling out the cracks and the crevices and the bubbles and the things that will cause this thing to be structurally not sound. Okay, well the same thing sort of happens in space, or sort of not happens in space, because we're still not building cinder blocks on Mars yet, are we? Or on the moon or anything else. Speaking of the moon, real quick too, an aside. Supposedly we dropped a new trawler on the moon or something, some device on the moon. You guys hear this news? First time in 50 years that we went back to the moon, but it crashed. It landed on its side. Terrible. Oh, do I have a soundboard for this? Let's see. Maybe we have to have this. Come on, is it a thing? Nah, no, well, it's too late. The moment has passed. Anyway, but you get what I'm saying. Okay, so concrete in space seems strange, all right? And how it fits into the larger sense, I don't know. I don't know yet. But, of course, we'll find out in the coming years as we're told. But there's also glass. So glass is another thing, too. So in space, you can blow some glass and let it harden in midair without any gravity acting on it. To keep it from randomly drifting over and burning a hole in your face, you can hold it in place without anything touching it using acoustic waves. Just very much like we described with the cement process, where you kind of buzz the for lack of a better term, the concrete vibrator into the thing, and it kind of shakes out the imperfections. But in the same sense, right? So the result of the glass here is a higher form of glass, and you can see this as depicted in the images here in the website. Like I said, click the link, you'll see what I mean. But the glass created in space is completely pure. It seems to be almost like a clear waterfall versus something that has, bubbles and, all the rest of this, again, more imperfections in it. And so this becomes once again, creating these things in space. And then, of course, it gets to drugs and some other stuff, of course, in this article, the top 5 things, 5 things that gain superpowers when we take them to space. Well, you know me, and my being a weird guy, I'm like, okay, here's the deal. So what if we take our soul to space? Right? Or what if we take, again, back to the idea of this OBE avatar, which, again, oddly enough, we did talk about this when we did the Lamb show. You guys remember this? We did a show with regarding Lamb and, sort of the revisiting that old story, the Crowley story. And one of the actual interpretations of what Lamb is, that entity with the big head, is that it was this actual OBE avatar of Crowley himself. And so he saw himself possibly as this entity with this massive bald head because he thought he was smarter than everybody and, this type of thing. I don't know. It was one theory as part of that, and it did come to mind when I was putting this show together tonight. But that's the thing, right? So we're talking about the OBE avatar, which is the second body, this whatever kind of pops out of you into these astral spaces. And I do wonder if there is an effect when you leave this in space. Let's say it wanders off for 1,000 years in a particular direction, and is it possible to get lost and not be able to kind of find your body back because you've been, let's say in some stasis state forever, that maybe this thing has just wandered off and got lost in space, and there's some, dare I say, back to this original article, the superpower effect happening because of the creation of something in space. And in this case, we're talking the second body. So I don't really know. As usual, just some ideas, kind of throwing them out there, and some other wild stuff we'll get to. But it is strange that you consider the space definitely is one of those, the final frontier, as they say, right? They did space, the final frontier. And for a lot of reasons, because, you send astronauts to space and they have, damage to their body, damage to their brain. And then again, just this other effect, this seeing the Earth from the outside, this overview effect also, it changes our mind. It changes the way we think, the way we see the world, the way we see everything. But when you're, exposed to this, pale blue dot from outside of our atmosphere, it's a wild thing. But so think about all those changes now, and then apply it to maybe this idea of the OBE avatar. What do you know about it specifically? Is it possible to, when I go out of body, to become a red dragon like Smaug from Lord of the Rings? Is it something like this, or is it something a little more, let's say, close to home, where you kind of have to look like yourself a little bit? I don't know. Like I said, love to hear your theories on this. Maybe you guys have some experience doing this type of thing. But what does it look like, let's say, if you end up leaving this second body out there in space for a little bit too long? You think it affects it? Do you think it cares? It doesn't care? Is it so ethereal that it's not a thing that can be affected by space or the void? Or, well, I don't know. But that's what's on my mind tonight. I'm calling this, of course, the OBE avatar and Ghosts of the Deep Void, because what happens when you do uncouple that OBE second body from yourself and let it float into deep space? Simple, right? Simple concept, but of course, I think the wild ideas that come out of it are probably not so simple. So let's think about it. Let's talk about it. And that is exactly, my friends, what's on my mind tonight. Let's see. That's not the one. What is that? Right about there. That's the one I need. That's the right button. But yeah, so what do you know about it? Again, we're going back to the well with this OBE experience, the Robert Monroe type stuff, journeys out of body, the different locales. But what about the actual space itself, the void, the actual void? Do you think it actually affects any of this, the second body or anything else? Or again, am I barking up the wrong tree per usual, barking up the wrong cosmic tree? That wouldn't shock me at all. Now, it got me thinking in a lot of ways. As usual, I like to combine ideas, as you know, and consider that maybe we're not asking the right questions. And, if you're doing it right, as I've always said, if you ask the right question to 1,000 different people, you're likely to get 1,000 different answers. And to me, that means you're doing it right, because you're not kind of tracking, the lame stuff of the political spectrum and expecting exactly 2 answers out of every question, red or blue, or boo, boo, boo. It's so dumb, right? It's just a silly notion that there's only ever going to be 2 perspectives to any particular problem. But I digress. So back to this. Now, the OBE body itself is a lot of ways to look at this in terms of, let's say it's even a quasi-human soul. Some might argue it is our soul directly escaping and sort of exploring the the multiverse around us, or something to this effect, kind of very Doctor Strangey from Marvel or something like this. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's, again, back to the silver cord we've talked about in the past, and, being attached to this. But anyway, in any case, do you think any of this stuff actually affects, or space itself actually affects any of that? Or is it sort of independent? Is it sort of an ethereal space and none of this matters whatsoever? So we'll get to some wild ideas, as you know, because I have a ton of those, and that's really what I do here. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. What do you know about the OBE avatar, or of course the second body, as Robert Monroe called this? And do you think space at all, as it seems to affect nearly every other damn thing we're talking about, not just inanimate objects or creating glass in space or concrete, as we said, but even these flatworms where they cut their heads off, they grew 2 heads now. I mean, super creepy. It seems like it affects everything. So is it too much to ask, or let's say ask the question, does it affect the second body if you leave it in space for a little bit too long?